It appears that ufology is not the work of a single group of individuals, but rather a network of groups, like in the field of science. In my view, the fact that there are skeptics does not mean that ufology has become more scientific in approach. It means that researchers are starting to think like the people they used to criticize. Nowadays, skepticism about UFOs is a matter of personal opinion, just like believing in them used to be. It's not much different. After believing in UFOs for years, they decide not to believe anymore. What effect does that have? Rationalists say finally UFO researchers are becoming more scientific, but if we look at the facts, it just isn't true. Just when things were calming down and researchers were beginning to use a more scientific approach, the controversy started back up again. After having said they exist, they were turning around and saying they don't exist. Well, saying they don't exist doesn't make you a scientist, but it does spark controversy. This controversy is not making the field any more scientific. Since each person is proceeding according to their own personal opinion, it's very easy to become a UFO researcher. You have some business cards printed and publish an article in a few newsletters. It's much harder to be a scientist. You need to have diplomas, experience, and research work that's approved by others as a group.
The UFO field has been faced with two problems: frequent shifts in ideology and a lack of funding for its work. Victims of precarious budgets, most UFO associations cannot hire paid staff. This means that almost all of their members are volunteers, with the best of intentions, no doubt. But inevitably, they run into problems with the availability and competency of their members, which leads to less than ideal investigations. Fascinated by the subject of UFO since the mid-1970s, Antonio Junius, a writer for Fate magazine and co-author of the UFO briefing document, is quite familiar with the problems faced by UFO researchers.
One of the main problems of ufological research is the lack of funds. This is very bad, and especially when you go even to other countries, it's even more acute. And there was a short period, I would say through the 90s, where you suddenly had this emergence of the philanthropists.
In the late 1990s, U.S. multimillionaire Lawrence Rockefeller financed a series of meetings on the American East Coast. Chaired by astrophysicist Peter Sturrock of Stanford University, California, the Pocantico meetings are now considered to be the most important initiative that has taken place in the field of UFO study over the past few years. Francois Louange is an optics specialist who directs Flex Image, a corporation specializing in satellite imagery. He was an active participant at the Pocantico meetings.
The Pocantico conference, organized by Mr. Rockefeller in 1997, was highly instructive. This gentleman, who has large sums of money, tends to spend a lot on artistic and human causes. Lawrence Rockefeller had a certain curiosity about UFOs in general, and crop circles in particular. So he financed this week-long meeting at his Pocantico Center where his family had once lived. The idea was to discuss physical evidence, not just for UFOs, but in general.
Basically, you had two types of scientists. You had ufological scientists. These were people who were professional scientists, like Vallée and even Velasco and Richard Haynes and John Schussler and many others, who made the case for ufology. And they presented, the best landing cases, the best photography and so on, the best radar cases. And then you had a panel of neutral scientists, and these were people who were neither in favor nor against it, but they were professional scientists.
The goal was to have researchers speak about UFOs in front of a group of scientists, in the hopes of finding common ground and preparing a small booklet on their conclusions, Why did Rockefeller do this? Because up until that point, the only thing that existed in the field was the Condon report that had been sponsored by the U.S. Air Force several years earlier. The very thick Condon report was read by few people. It contains a lot of information, some of it on inexplicable phenomena. However, the official conclusions of the Condon report go something like this. First of all, we didn't find anything. And secondly, science has better things to do with its time than waste it on a subject like this that is of no interest. Condon closed the books on the subject, and scientists did that too. With regards to the Condon's conclusions, we agree at least on the first point. We didn't find anything really convincing, any absolute proof that unknown phenomena are occurring. And we found even less evidence of extraterrestrials. On the other hand, as to what science's position should be, we are diametrically opposed to Condon. We feel that given the evolution of the information gathered and the technologies at their disposal, it would be in the best interest of science to research the subject intelligently, to listen to UFO researchers, and to continue the work.
If the Pocantico Conference led to a recognition of the interest in UFOs, then why does the science community at large seem so uninterested in this phenomenon?
If someone were to find a technological application for the UFO problem, then just watch the benefactors line up to finance it. Maybe not UFO groups at first, but if another meeting were held with Mr. Sturrock, there might be a group of people who would say, "Aha, we're being offered 10 million, gentlemen. Go back to your drawing boards."
However, before we can speculate on how to interest the science community in UFOs, we need to have UFO groups themselves come to an agreement on the importance of the information gathered and the manner in which it is presented.
The material itself, the data, although there are some excellent cases, but it is very ambiguous, and you can basically adapt it to any theory you want, because you will select those elements of if you're interested in the more bizarre cases, you will find plenty of those. If you're interested in the more sort of sober, you'll concentrate with radar and pilot cases. So that's what I saw, that people, because they had a theory, then they were like digging up for those elements in the database that would support their theory.
After so many years, it may be surprising to find that so few professional researchers let themselves be carried away by a scientific interest in UFOs. Perhaps we are simply seeing a contrast between the ideal vision of science and the unorthodox reality of ufology.
One of the great failings of UFO research in the Western Hemisphere anyway, and not as much in Europe, but certainly in Canada and in the United States, has been the failure to convince the scientific and academic community of the legitimacy of the subject.
I think we're setting ourselves up for a disappointment when we expect science to come up with all of the solutions. When it comes to expanding knowledge, solutions are very rare. When scientists study a matter, very rarely do they agree on what it means. Of course, when we read history books about science, we see famous names such as Galileo, Newton, and Einstein, who all made a significant contribution to scientific knowledge. But we need to remember that 99% of all scientific research does not lead anywhere. The research is done because we need to ask questions and find answers. We need to make progress. Scientists often disagree. In the field of science, it's very difficult for everyone to agree. So if we were to take a scientist out of his controlled environment and place him in a situation with amateurs and people from different backgrounds, naturally he would find it more difficult to do his job. In that type of situation, scientists tend to have the attitude that UFO researchers are not capable of producing hard evidence. They're not like scientists who produce real results. I tend to see the problem differently. If we think about it, science hasn't produced a lot over the years, considering all the conditions imposed on scientists. They need to have a diploma, publish articles, sign contracts, and so forth. In contrast, it's amazing to see how much UFO groups like SOBEPS have managed to accomplish without a controlled environment. So if anything, I would say that the opposite is actually true. It's not that UFO researchers don't take their work seriously. Given the conditions under which they work, they're very serious in their approach. Perhaps we should be demanding that scientists produce a lot more than they do.
A half-century after the birth of ufology, UFO hunters are still practically as far away from a global answer as they were back then. Can their limited success be blamed on a lack of effort, a poor choice of witnesses? Or is it simply that ufologists have had to pay the price for resorting to sensationalism once too often?
Well, obviously, we still don't know what the UFOs are. If we did, the discussion would already be on a different level. People already automatically, and this is even in France, I would say not the researchers, but the culture and the media, automatically equates UFOs with extraterrestrial beings, coming in spaceships. So this is the sort of the cultural interpretation. The popular cultural interpretation, I would say, all over the world.
In this world of superficial choices and judgments, abduction by aliens, the Roswell crash and cover-up, these are sexy. These are hot topics. Even though time is passing, Roswell's 53 years ago, it still captures the public imagination tremendously.
I think it makes it very difficult for the serious research of ufology because so much of it now has become basically a media-oriented entertainment and sensationalism.